I plan on having a lot of fun in this video, and I hope it's something that people don't take too seriously, but I do want to try and answer the question, is combat knife throwing a real thing? Is it relevant? Is it viable? Is it realistic? Let's talk about all of these things in this video. Stick around. Some of you right off the bat are saying, no, there's no such thing in that, it's foolish. Right off the bat, I don't personally know of any accounts where a knife was thrown in combat and the thrower was successful. I heard one guy talking about one instance where a guy threw a knife a very long ways and hit someone. I don't have the details of that story, but I personally do not have any data to pull from. Where I tend to differ from a lot of people, though, is the fact that I think that just about anything can become combative. You can be combative with a friggin' broomstick. Doesn't mean you'll be successful, but you can be combative with it. And again, you can be combative with a lot of things that people are not usually combative with. But we're going to answer the question, is there a such thing as combat knife throwing? But then there are other questions that piggyback this, such as if there is a such thing as combat knife throwing, what style would be associated with it? Because sometimes when someone says I'm a combat knife thrower, that doesn't mean that they throw knives in combat. It just means that they throw knives in a way that would be applicable in a combative scenario. Now, I'm liable to rile the quote-unquote knife throwing community up with this video, and believe you me, the knife throwing world has its gatekeepers. Nevertheless, I'm tackling this information because I want to and I find it interesting. I know this for a fact. Several guys here on YouTube that throw knives have already done the whole ballistic gel test, ballistic skulls. Heavy enough knives sink right into that stuff, right into ballistic skulls. I even did a test a while back showing how knife throwing was more powerful than a stab. So did I spend $150, $200 on ballistic gel to make this video? No, I'm just telling you that others have, and their knives sunk into that ballistic gel, so it hits hard. To those chomping at the bit wanting to comment, never throw your knife away, never throw your only knife away. We know that already. That's one of the first things we establish in the subject of combat knife throwing. But is it relevant? Is it a real thing? It's obviously not a first world combative or go-to, we know that, but could it be? Basic common sense says that a big knife like this, something like this F&Grow EF-131, flying through the air at high speeds at an unaware target and landing flush could do great damage, could go all the way in, and common sense tells us that this flying through the air is a dangerous thing. Nobody can take that truth away. No matter how we look at it, this is dangerous. I'm not advocating it as a primary go-to, just a basic question. Is this not menacing? Whether or not combat knife throwing is a thing, or if it's even worth talking about, my common sense brain simply responds to that question by saying that a heavy piece of steel with a point in the hands of somebody who can throw it extremely fast and quiet and instinctive is absolutely something to be looked at. And listen, there are plenty of guys out there, myself included, who refer to themselves as combat knife throwers. Now, don't misunderstand them. They're not saying that they get out and throw knives in combat on a regular. What they're saying is their style of knife throwing is something that could apply to the combative world. Let's say that this target doesn't see me and then this happens. Whether knife throwing is one of those things we have on record or whether we have accounts of people doing knife throwing in battle or combative situations, aside from all of that, I came out of nowhere with a heavy knife and I threw it very fast and it hit hard with a greater power than a stab. That is a combative. That would be a very crucial thing if it connected with a vital and it was quiet. I'm not saying it's a primary go-to or a normal thing, but it speaks for itself. Now, I don't see that type of combative as something that would be very effective against an aware assailant, because they're going to just try to dodge it or run out of the way. They're going to have time to prepare for it. I see something like that as a means of silent warfare. I think the scope of something like that being very successful is very limited. Hopefully by now you understand my philosophy. Whether or not something is a go-to or a normal thing that is practiced doesn't mean that it's not a thing, and it doesn't mean that it couldn't be. This might bother some people, but there's a lot of guys out here on YouTube that'll just comment and say, well, I'll just use my gun for everything. My gun, my gun, my gun. And they don't care about training in any other type of skill or weapon. I don't relate to that mindset. I personally believe it's a cop-out. I carry a firearm as well. I train with a firearm too. But I still think understanding other weapons is always going to be relevant. So I vote yes. Combat knife throwing in rare scenarios could be a thing. Now let's talk about what styles would be the most effective. It would obviously be that which you could do the most instinctive, because that's the thing that separates combat knife throwers from other throwers is we don't rely on lines. We don't have a set distance. We can throw as effective from 15 feet as we can from 7. We learn to throw instinctive within a certain distance where we are. Now my favorite styles are what some would call hammer grip no spin and military half spin. I've done tutorials on this throw, but you're pulling it back and pushing it this way. It's very instinctive. Some don't like to call it no spin because it turns over in the air this way. I say yada yada. The bottom line is you're pushing it and letting it slide out of your hand. Whether it's 10, 15, or 20 feet, I can do that throw on the fly. Or I can do half spin holding the blade like this, and I can change my distance by creeping up the blade this way. In this next clip, I'm doing various throws with a bow shuriken. I have 2 tutorials on hammer grip no spin throwing. I've also got some half spin tutorials. You just have to dig through my video list. You can just type 411 outdoors, hammer grip no spin, knife throwing tutorial. You'll find the tutorials on how I do what I do. Heck, I'll even drop them in the description. I get out here and do this stuff for fun, but what I'm saying is this is one of those skill sets that could be more, if you know what I mean. I'm not saying you need to learn to throw knives so that you can carry a throwing knife with you everywhere that you go, carry it as an EDC. I'm not going that far with it. I'm just not going to negate its effectiveness just because it's not a mainstream thing. So yes, combat knife throwing is a thing, just like so many other things are a thing when they're in capable hands. To all the knife throwers out there, whether you agree or disagree, just do your thing. I don't try to get on here and gatekeep and tell other knife throwers what to do. I do what I like to do, and I have my own knife throwing worldview. I personally think it's more important to learn how to hold on to your blade and use it in your hand versus learning to throw it. But it's a lot of fun learning to throw a knife, and it's a lot of fun learning how to throw it this way. And whether the world ends up in some apocalypse and you get to use this skill or not, it's still an incredible journey learning to throw a knife in a way that's instinctive and free. It's fun going from here to here. I think a lot of things are dangerous. I think that when it comes to weapons and combatives, we have endless options to practice, train in. People might find certain subjects absurd, but it's hard to deny real skill. Is it combative? Sure, it could be.